She spat on my service dog. Right on his vest, the one that clearly says, "Do not pet." This woman, a total stranger, looked me, a 60-year-old veteran in a wheelchair, right in the eye and then defiled the animal that helps me live my life. And if that obscenity wasn't enough, she had the gall to hiss, "You're faking your disability." Have you ever been so consumed by a sudden white-hot fury that the world just stops? That was me. Frozen. Staring up at this meticulously styled nightmare of a human being, this Karen, as my loyal Max flinched beside me. The sheer, unadulterated malice in her eyes was terrifying. She actually smirked, proud of what she'd done. But here's the thing about people like her, people so drunk on their own entitlement they think they can spew their poison without consequence. They're usually broadcasting their own downfall. And this psycho Karen, with her glossy lipstick and venomous words, had no earthly idea that her disgusting public spectacle wasn't just an assault. It was the match that would light her entire self-important world on fire. Oh, she was about to learn, in the most spectacularly public way possible, what happens when you push a quiet man and his loyal dog too far. My name is John, and for the better part of 60 years, I've valued peace above most things. After 25 years in the armed forces, carrying the weight of experiences that etch themselves onto your soul, and managing injuries that are a constant, dull ache, a quiet existence wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. Adjusting to life predominantly in a wheelchair took every ounce of my resilience. The stubborn refusal of my legs to cooperate fully, the ever-present phantom sensations, they were daily battles. But the invisible war, the PTSD, that's a different kind of enemy. And that's where my boy Max comes in. Max is more than just a golden retriever with a heart bigger than Texas. He's my anchor in a sometimes stormy sea. His official designation is service animal, a title he carries with a gentle gravitas that I deeply admire. He's trained to assist with the tangible, retrieving dropped keys, nudging open reluctant doors, bracing me during tricky transfers. His fur often smells faintly of sunshine and calm. But his most profound service is intangible. He's a furry, four-pawed early warning system for the anxiety that can ambush me, for the nightmares that try to drag me back to the shadows. A soft muzzle resting on my knee, a warm, reassuring presence pressed against me in the dark hours, these are his quiet ways of saying, "I'm here. You're safe." He's my steadfast companion in the ongoing, silent campaign for peace of mind. We resided in a pleasant suburban town, the kind with mature trees forming canopies over quiet streets and well-kept parks. My days followed a predictable, comforting rhythm. Early mornings, Max would trot patiently beside my wheelchair, his tail a happy metronome as we made our way around the neighborhood. Our usual pit stop was the Daily Grind, a small, friendly coffee shop. Sarah, the owner, always greeted us with a genuine smile, a hot black coffee for me and, after always politely asking, a small, plain biscuit for Max, who'd settle under the patio table, a picture of canine decorum. Most folks in our town were like Sarah, considerate, respectful. They saw the vest, they saw me, and if they didn't fully grasp the details, they at least possessed basic human decency. Max, it must be said, was an exemplary ambassador, always calm, always focused, never a bother. This hard-won stability was my sanctuary, a shield Max helped me maintain. That shield, however, was about to be violently rattled by a woman who seemed to regard the entire world as an inconvenience personally designed to annoy her. Our first unfortunate encounter with Carol, a name I'd later learn, though Psycho Karen forever remains her unofficial, more fitting moniker in my mind, occurred on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. It was our customary mid-morning pilgrimage to the Daily Grind. The weather was mild, a gentle spring breeze rustling the new leaves, and Max was contentedly sniffing the fragrant air by my chair as we waited in the typically short queue. That's when I registered it, that unmistakable, prickling feeling on the back of my neck, the one that screams you're under hostile surveillance. I angled my head slightly. And there she was. Mid-40s, I guessed, sporting an aggressively sharp, highlighted blonde bob that looked like it could double as a weapon. Her lips, a slash of garish, glossy red, were pursed in a moue of extreme disapproval as her gaze bounced between Max and me. She was clad in high-end athleisure wear that suggested more ladies who lunch than laps around the track, and she clutched an oversized designer handbag as if it contained state secrets. When it was her turn, she ordered some overly complicated multisyllabic coffee concoction with the weary air of a queen addressing a particularly slow serf. Then as she waited for her royal brew, her eyes, like laser sights, found Max again. He was, as always, lying placidly by my wheelchair, head on his paws, the picture of serenity. "Are they just allowing any animal in here now?" she announced, her voice pitched to Carrie, clearly intended for the entire establishment, myself included. The disdain was palpable, thick enough to spread on toast. I let out a slow internal sigh. Here we go again. "He's a service animal, ma'am," I stated, keeping my voice level and calm, projecting politeness I absolutely did not feel. I indicated Max's vest, emblazoned with the clear, unambiguous words, "Service dog, do not pet." She emitted a short, sharp, skeptical bark of a laugh. "Oh, one of those. It seems like absolutely everyone has a supposed service animal these days just so they can take their precious little pets into stores." Her eyes performed a contemptuous sweep of my seated form, lingering on my wheelchair for a beat, before flicking back to Max with an audible, dismissive sniff. A familiar heat began to creep up my neck. "He is a fully trained, certified medical service dog, ma'am, assisting me with my documented disability," I elaborated, fighting to keep the defensive tremor from my voice. It was a speech I'd delivered countless times, a mantra of legitimacy, usually met with a nod of understanding or, at worst, a shrug of indifference. "Right," she drawled, stretching the word into an insult. "A disability. Of course." With a final withering glare at Max, she snatched her coffee from the counter and swept out, leaving a wake of cold disapproval and the faint, cloying scent of expensive hairspray. I caught Sarah's eye. The owner offered a small, apologetic grimace and a subtle headshake. I tried to dismiss it. Just another ignorant, rude individual. But there was an aggressive certainty to her judgment, a smug conviction in her eyes, that burrowed under my skin. This hadn't felt like a casual moment of rudeness. It felt like the opening salvo of a campaign. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This Karen, I sensed with a grim certainty, was only just warming up. My premonition chillingly proved accurate. It was as if Carol, having identified Max and me as offensive blips on her personal radar, suddenly manifested everywhere we went. Or, more unsettlingly, perhaps she began actively seeking us out, eager for another opportunity to dispense her unsolicited, venomous opinions. A few days after the coffee shop incident, Max and I were in the local park. It's a sprawling green space, and I usually found a quiet bench by the meticulously tended rose garden. Max would lie contentedly in the cool grass beside me, his leash loose, while I lost myself in a book. Suddenly that familiar, grating voice sliced through the afternoon peace. "Some people have absolutely no consideration, letting their animals trample all over the public flower beds." I looked up, my heart sinking. There she was, Carol. Power walking along the paved path, her expensive sneakers making barely a whisper. Max, I should note, was lying precisely where he always did, a good 10 feet from the nearest rose bush, on his leash, head resting on his paws. He hadn't twitched a muscle. "He's nowhere near the flower beds, ma'am, and he's on a leash and under my complete control," I called out, striving for politeness but with a definite edge of firmness. This was becoming tiresome. She stopped dead, pivoted with military precision, and skewered me with that now infamous icy glare. Her oversized sunglasses were pushed up onto her helmet of blonde hair, revealing eyes narrowed in patent disbelief. "He shouldn't even be in a public park if he's not under what I consider perfect control. These parks are for families, for young children to play safely. Not for that." She gestured vaguely and dismissively towards Max with a flick of her wrist, her perfectly manicured nails flashing. "He is under perfect control," I stated, my patience fraying like an old rope. "And he has every legal and moral right to be here. He is a service animal, assisting me." "Oh, here we go with this service animal charade again," she scoffed, her voice rising in volume, causing a young mother with 2 toddlers to glance over nervously. "I know your type. You people just want to drag your dogs everywhere you go. What critical service is he supposedly providing for you right now, anyway? You look perfectly capable of sitting on that bench all by yourself." My blood pressure spiked. The audacity. The sheer, unmitigated gall of this woman to stand there, radiating smug judgment, and dissect my life, my very visible physical limitations, my invisible wounds. My specific medical conditions and the precise reasons I require the assistance of a service animal are frankly and profoundly none of your damn business, I retorted, my voice tighter now, sharper. I felt Max shift beside me, a low, almost inaudible rumble starting deep in his chest. He sensed my agitation. I placed a hand on his broad head, a silent signal to remain calm, though my own was rapidly deserting me. Carol simply smirked, a truly repellent twisting of her features. That's what all the fakers say when they're caught out. She then spun on her heel, her power walk resuming with renewed vigor, leaving me trembling with a potent cocktail of helpless anger and public humiliation. The young mother quickly gathered her children and hurried away, casting a wide, wary arc around us. I felt like a contaminant, a public nuisance. This harassment became her hobby. In the brightly lit aisles of the grocery store, I'd hear her stage whispering to her shopping cart about unhygienic animals shedding everywhere, if she spotted us. She even cornered the store manager, a young chap named Kevin, launching into a verbose complaint. To Kevin's immense credit, he listened with forced patience to her tirade before calmly and firmly informing her about the ADA and the legal rights of service animals. I witnessed the exchange. Her face contorted into a mask of indignation, and she shot me a look that promised future retribution. She took to ostentatiously pulling out her phone whenever she saw us, aiming it like a weapon and snapping photos, muttering about gathering evidence and reporting this to the highest authorities. I started to feel haunted. I tried altering my routines, frequenting different establishments, visiting the park at off-peak hours. It made no difference. She was an omnipresent blight, a persistent, noxious weed in the garden of my life. Her attacks were relentless, a daily grind of passive-aggressive barbs, public microaggressions, and outright, loud accusations. The constant stress began to erode my carefully constructed defenses. My sleep, already a fragile truce, became a battlefield of anxieties. I found myself perpetually on edge, scanning every public space, every cafe corner, every park bench for that signature blonde bob and judgmental scowl. My hypervigilance, a relic of my service days, went into overdrive. Max, my saintly companion, was working double time, his nudges more frequent, his grounding presence more vital than ever as the ambient anxiety she generated threatened to overwhelm me. He was my steadfast shield, but even I could see the subtle signs of stress in him. He'd watch Carol with a low, unhappy whine if she ventured too close, his usually unflappable calm visibly ruffled by her aggressive aura. I even found myself hesitating before going out for simple errands, the thought of an encounter with her making my stomach churn. This woman was stealing my peace, my freedom, one sneering comment at a time, and her entitlement only seemed to magnify with each unchallenged insult. The breaking point, the incident that would finally shatter my resolve to simply endure her abuse, happened on a day that began with a deceptive air of normalcy. Max and I needed a few items from the supermarket, the very one where Kevin, the manager, had previously and admirably defended our right to be. I'd been actively avoiding the place, but it was the closest, the most convenient for my mobility, and I'd hoped, foolishly, that the odds of another encounter were slim. Famous last words, as they say. As I was maneuvering my wheelchair out of the automatic doors, purchases secured, I saw her. Carol. Positioned strategically near the entrance like a malevolent gargoyle, chattering animatedly into her phone, her voice sharp enough to etch glass. My stomach instantly tied itself into a cold, hard knot. I attempted to steer a wide berth around her, praying for invisibility. Such prayers, however, rarely work against Karen's. Her eyes, like those of a predator spotting vulnerable prey, locked onto me and Max. She terminated her call with a curt snap. "Oh, for crying out loud, are you actually stalking me now?" she bit out, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage. She had the audacity to take an aggressive step towards us, effectively blocking my exit. "Excuse me, please," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I tried to navigate my chair past her. "I'm simply trying to leave." "No, I don't think I will excuse you," she retorted, her face hardening into a mask of righteous indignation. "I am absolutely sick to death of seeing you and that filthy mutt everywhere I go. You are a contemptible fraud. You're not disabled in the slightest. You're just a lazy freeloader, using that poor, unfortunate animal as a prop to garner sympathy and demand special treatment." Her voice was escalating, each word a verbal slap, drawing the uncomfortable attention of shoppers entering and exiting the store. My cheeks burned with a humiliating heat. "Ma'am, I am a 60-year-old disabled veteran," I stated, my voice low and trembling despite every effort to keep it steady. "Max is a legitimate, highly trained service animal. You are harassing me in public. Please, I'm asking you to move." This is where the situation devolved from merely verbally abusive to physically disgusting. For several weeks, prompted by a fellow veteran who'd faced similar public skepticism about his own invisible injuries, I'd reluctantly begun to discreetly record any aggressive encounters. "John," he'd said, "sometimes clear footage is the only language these bullies understand." It felt almost underhanded, but Carol's relentless, targeted campaign had pushed me to it. As her tirade intensified, my hand, acting almost on autopilot, had found the record button on my phone, which was mounted on my wheelchair's armrest, ostensibly for navigation. "Disabled veteran?" she screeched, her voice cracking with theatrical disbelief, her face contorted with a bizarre mixture of rage and triumph. "Oh, spare me. You probably spent your entire service sitting comfortably behind a desk somewhere and now you expect a lifetime free pass for everything. You're an absolute insult to our real heroes." And then she did the unthinkable. She leaned forward, her perfectly painted lips puckered into an ugly sneer, and she spat. A deliberate viscous glob of saliva arced through the air and landed with a sickening little sound squarely on Max's bright red service dog. "Do not pet" vest. Time seemed to stutter and warp. Max let out a small, surprised yelp and flinched, looking up at me with wide, bewildered eyes that mirrored my own shock. For a heart-stopping moment, I was utterly paralyzed, not by fear but by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage so potent it stole my breath. The calculated cruelty, the sheer, unmitigated vileness of her action, it was beyond comprehension. My voice, when I finally dredged it up from the depths of my fury, was dangerously, deceptively quiet. You did not just spit on my dog." "Oh, I most certainly did," she sneered, a hideously triumphant, self-satisfied smirk spreading across her face. "Maybe that will finally teach you to stop your pathetic charade of faking a disability and parading that disgusting, flea-bitten animal around in public." She actually looked proud, as if she'd performed a public service. That's when the universe, or perhaps just karmic timing, decided to deal a hand. Just as Carol was preening, basking in the imagined glory of her disgusting act, a nearby car door slammed shut with authority. A woman emerged, someone I recognized instantly, though my mind was still reeling. It was Mrs. Davis, a highly respected local councilwoman. Mrs. Davis was a formidable figure in our town, renowned for her passionate advocacy for disability rights and her unwavering support for veterans' affairs. She was known for her sharp intellect and a zero-tolerance policy for injustice. Carol, still inflated with her perceived victory, remained oblivious. Mrs. Davis, however, had clearly witnessed the tail end of Carol's venomous diatribe and her utterly revolting, triumphant expression. The councilwoman's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury as she strode purposefully towards the unfolding drama. Carol, so deeply enmeshed in her own righteous crusade, so utterly convinced of her moral superiority, had no inkling that her little sidewalk performance had just gained a very influential, and profoundly unimpressed, audience member. The entire dynamic of the situation was about to undergo a seismic shift. And Psycho Karen was about to discover that spitting on a service dog, especially in front of the town's foremost advocate for disability rights, was a catastrophically poor life choice. Mrs. Davis reached us just as Carol was proclaiming, her voice still ringing with that shrill, accusatory tone, "And I intend to report you to animal control immediately for having an aggressive, unsanitary, and quite frankly dangerous animal in a public space." "Actually," Mrs. Davis interjected, her voice calm but possessing an unmistakable steel that sliced cleanly through Carol's bluster, "I believe it is your deplorable behavior that warrants immediate reporting." Carol whirled around, her jaw dropping slightly in surprise. Her eyes widened almost comically as she registered who had spoken. You could practically see the frantic calculations whirring in her head, the sudden dawning horror that this might not be the simple, satisfying public takedown of a faker she had so gleefully orchestrated. "Mrs. Davis, I was just, dealing with a public nuisance," she stammered, her previous aggressive confidence visibly deflating like a punctured balloon. "I saw and heard quite enough, madam," Mrs. Davis stated, her gaze unwavering and intensely disapproving. "I heard your disgusting, baseless accusations, and I witnessed your utterly contemptible and assaultive behavior towards this gentleman and his clearly identified service animal." She then turned to me, her expression softening with genuine concern. "Mr. Henderson, are you all right? Is Max okay?" I was still trembling, a volatile mixture of residual rage and surging adrenaline making my hands shake. She actually spat on him," I managed, my voice hoarse with disbelief. "Right on Max's vest." Then the memory of my phone's recording function surfaced through the haze. My hand, though unsteady, reached down and decisively stopped the recording. And I believe I have the entire exchange on video. Carol's face, which had begun to pale, now flushed a blotchy, furious red. "Video? What video? That's an outrageous invasion of my privacy. He has no right to film me without my consent." "Actually, ma'am," I said, a sudden surge of strength and clarity flowing through me, "in a public place, especially when you are actively committing an act of harassment, and what I believe constitutes assault against a service animal, I most certainly do have the right." And I did. I held up my phone, my thumb hovering pointedly over the playback icon. "Would you care for a private viewing? Or perhaps the store manager would be interested. Or maybe even the local police department." By this point, a small but growing crowd of curious onlookers had gathered. Shoppers, drawn by the raised voices and the palpable tension, were watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. The store manager, Kevin, alerted by the escalating commotion, hurried out from the entrance. He looked from Carol's flustered face to my grim one, then to the composed but clearly incensed Mrs. Davis, his expression immediately wary and concerned. "What on earth is going on out here?" Kevin asked, though his pointed gaze at Carol suggested he already had a prime suspect for the source of the disturbance. "This woman," Mrs. Davis announced, her voice ringing with righteous indignation that commanded attention, "has just subjected Mr. Henderson to a barrage of verbal abuse and then, quite literally, spat upon his service animal. Mr. Henderson is a respected veteran in our community, and this animal is essential for his daily functioning and well-being." Carol immediately launched into a desperate, shrill defense. "He's faking it all. It's not a real service dog, I tell you. I saw him just last week." "Enough." Mrs. Davis's voice cracked with authority, silencing Carol mid-squawk. "I have had the misfortune of dealing with individuals espousing your particular brand of ignorant prejudice before, madam. People who anoint themselves as arbiters of truth over matters they clearly know nothing about. Your profound ignorance is regrettable, but your actions here today are utterly despicable and potentially illegal." I took a deep, steadying breath. "Kevin," I said, turning to the now visibly concerned manager, "this woman Carol has been systematically harassing me and Max for weeks. Today she escalated to accusing me of faking my disability in public, and then she deliberately spat on my dog. I have the entire incident, including her words and actions, recorded right here." I held out the phone towards him. Kevin hesitated for only a fraction of a second, his expression hardening as he met my gaze, then he nodded grimly. "May I please see that, Mr. Henderson?" I pressed play. The slightly tinny audio from my phone's speaker filled the sudden silence. Carol's screeching accusations, her vile pronouncements about me being a fraud and an insult to real heroes, and then, unmistakably, the visual of her leaning in, her face contorted in a sneer, and the disgusting act of her spitting directly onto Max's vest. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Carol's face seemed to crumple inward. Her meticulously styled blonde hair suddenly looked disheveled, her glossy red lipstick a grotesque smear against the pallor of her exposed ugliness. That's completely taken out of context," she shrieked, her voice now laced with a raw, desperate panic. "He provoked me. That dog, it's dangerous, it lunged at me." Max, who had remained a model of canine composure by my side throughout this entire ordeal, let out a soft, mournful whine and nudged my hand gently, as if to personally refute her slander. "I'm not dangerous, Dad," his eyes seemed to say. Mrs. Davis was having none of Carol's desperate fabrications. "Provoked you? By lawfully existing in a public space with his accredited, impeccably behaved service animal? Madam, the only individual exhibiting dangerous and provocative behavior here is you." She turned her steely gaze to Kevin. "Manager, I trust you will be taking immediate and appropriate action regarding this woman's absolutely appalling conduct on your store's premises. This type of targeted harassment is intolerable anywhere, but it is particularly reprehensible when directed towards our veterans and individuals with disabilities. Kevin, now looking thoroughly incensed and resolute, nodded decisively. Absolutely, Mrs. Davis. Ma'am, he said, turning to face Carol squarely, his voice firm and unwavering, your behavior today has been disgraceful and is completely unacceptable. You are hereby banned from this store and its property, effective immediately. If you set foot here again, we will consider it an act of trespassing and will not hesitate to involve the police. Carol looked as if she'd been physically struck. You can't do that to me. I'm a loyal customer. I spend hundreds, thousands of dollars in this store every year. Not anymore, you won't, Kevin stated flatly, unmoved by her sputtered threats. Now, I must insist that you leave the premises immediately. Her face was a twisted mask of impotent fury and acute public humiliation. She shot me one final venomous glare, then with a choked sound of outrage she turned and practically fled, her expensive sneakers thudding on the pavement as she scurried towards her car, a figure of deflated arrogance. The assembled onlookers murmured amongst themselves, some shaking their heads in disgust, others offering me quiet, sympathetic looks. Mrs. Davis placed a comforting, steadying hand on my shoulder. Mr. Henderson, I am so profoundly sorry that you and Max had to endure such a vile attack. No one, absolutely no one, should be subjected to that kind of treatment. I will be in touch with you shortly. We should certainly discuss filing a formal complaint regarding this harassment. There are specific laws in place to protect individuals with service animals from this sort of thing, you know. I could only manage a nod, a profound wave of exhaustion mixed with an equally profound sense of relief washing over me. The confrontation, the culmination of weeks of mounting stress, was finally over. The truth, undeniably captured by a small piece of everyday technology and championed by the timely arrival of a compassionate and influential ally, had unequivocally prevailed. Max licked my hand, his big, soulful brown eyes filled with concern and unwavering loyalty. I stroked his head, my heart swelling with an almost painful intensity of love for this incredible animal. He'd borne the brunt of her ugliness with quiet dignity, and still, his primary concern was for my well-being. Psycho Karen's self-appointed reign of terror, at least in my small corner of the world, had finally and very publicly come to an end. The immediate aftermath unfolded with surprising and gratifying speed. News of Carol's spectacular public meltdown and her utterly disgusting behavior, especially with the highly credible Mrs. Davis as a key witness and the irrefutable video evidence making the rounds, spread through our relatively tight-knit community like a summer grass fire. It turned out that Mrs. Davis, beyond her counsel duties, also penned a popular and influential column for the local online news portal. While she refrained from naming names directly in her subsequent piece, a thoughtful article on community respect, the critical role of service animals, and the legal protections afforded to them, the specific details she included were more than enough for anyone who'd caught even a whisper of the supermarket incident to connect the dots. Carol, or Spitting Karen as she reportedly became known in certain local online forums and whispered conversations, suddenly found her carefully curated social standing evaporating. The owner of The Daily Grind, Sarah, after hearing the full story, quietly and firmly informed Carol she was no longer a welcome patron. Other local businesses, alerted by the remarkably efficient town grapevine, also began to give her the distinct cold shoulder. Her pristine, self-important world started to crumble, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, rustling sound of countless closing doors and deliberately averted gazes. There is, I discovered, a certain undeniable poetic justice in watching someone so desperately craving validation and superiority receive only the negative, isolating kind. For me and Max, life began to slowly recalibrate towards a new kind of normalcy, albeit one tinged with a heightened awareness. The outpouring of genuine support from the community was both humbling and incredibly heartwarming. People I barely knew would approach me on the street or in stores not to stare, but to express their sincere support, to apologize for Carol's behavior as if it were a stain on the entire town, and to offer Max an extra, gentle pat, always after asking permission, a small courtesy that now felt monumental. Kevin, the store manager, even presented Max with a generous gift certificate for a local artisan pet bakery, which Max thoroughly enjoyed. Mrs. Davis, true to her word, was a steadfast ally. She assisted me in navigating the process of filing a formal harassment complaint with the local authorities. While it didn't result in Carol facing jail time, it did culminate in a formal police warning being issued to her, and a legally binding restraining order that prohibited her from approaching or contacting me or Max. The official documentation of her abhorrent behavior, filed away in public records, was, in itself, a significant and deeply validating victory. Looking back on the whole sordid ordeal with Psycho Karen, it was undeniably an ugly, stressful, and emotionally draining chapter. It unearthed feelings of anger, frustration, and profound vulnerability that I thought I had, for the most part, managed to lay to rest. But it also served as a powerful, if unwelcome, teacher. It reminded me of the quiet, resilient strength that can be found in standing up for oneself, and for one's loyal companions, even when every instinct screams for retreat. It underscored, with painful clarity, the profound and often underestimated importance of service animals like Max, not just for the indispensable physical tasks they perform, but for the unwavering, unconditional emotional support they provide in the face of human ignorance and cruelty. And perhaps most significantly, it reaffirmed my underlying faith in the fundamental decency of most people. For every venomous Carol in the world, there are countless kind souls, like Mrs. Davis and Sarah and Kevin, ready to offer compassion, support, and a firm, unwavering voice against injustice. Max, of course, received a brand new, even spiffier service vest, not because the old one was irreparably soiled by Carol's spite, but simply because he'd earned it 10 times over. He continues to lie patiently by my side, my steadfast shadow, my furry guardian angel, his presence a constant comfort. And as for Carol? The last I heard through the ever-reliable town grapevine was that her house had gone up for sale, a motivated seller's sign prominently displayed out front. Some acts of public ugliness, it seems, carry consequences that even the thickest hide of entitlement cannot fully deflect. And that knowledge, I must admit, brings with it a quiet, deeply satisfying and long overdue sense of peace. Justice, like a good and faithful dog, sometimes just needs a little help and a clear path to find its way home.